First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about patriarchy and the contemporary planetary situation. And then I'm going to suggest to you that another word for patriarchy might be a rather awkward formulation, puerarchy. And I'm going to, if you will bear with me, I'm going to talk quite a little while tonight about puer psychology, because puer psychology is extremely important in understanding the difficulty of being a male and the difficulty of putting up with males. So I'm going to spend a good bit of our hour tonight talking about puer psychology in a different way, perhaps, than you've heard it talked about. But in a way I hope that you will see is consistent with the wonderful work of von Franz on this topic and the work of others. And then I'm going to turn to the question of the initiation into masculine power. And I just want to have you think, and you may want to review this a little in your mind before we get to that place, think a little bit about the fairy tale of the men's movement, Iron Hans, just briefly. I will not go into that in depth except to remind you of Robert Bly's commentary on that fairy tale and to add some perspectives of my own that I think are relevant to this question of the initiation into masculine power. And then I'm going to deal with a very difficult topic, but one which is extremely important for us, and that is masculine power in the service of oppression and death. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and see if we can see this as a form of puer psychology, and I believe we can. I will show you how I think we can do that. Then I will give you some traits of the mature masculine, an image or two. I will talk about the warrior soul of the male and the problems that all men have with that, and say just a bit about what we've got to do if we are to deal with the planetary challenge of masculine initiation into a constructive side of the archetypal potential. So that's a lot, and I'm just going to give it a once-over, but I hope not too lightly. So let me just start off a little bit. There is much talk today about patriarchy being the culture of patriarchy and its psychology being at the root of the crisis which we find ourselves in on the planet today. And for those of you who have a historical interest, for the kind of tragedies that we see throughout human history. Plato said only the dead have seen the end of war, and the human history has been full of atrocities from the beginning. And so one of the things I want to suggest to you tonight that the current eclipse of historical studies is a very dangerous thing, because it lets us get too much into a puer romantic fantasy about men and about the reality of our current situation. But I want you to think just for a moment about the conditions that we face now, coming up toward the turn of the millennium. This could go on, and we could spend a whole series of lectures just talking about the situation, but I just want to call your attention to the fact that men today are in the forefront of the pollution project of the earth. Our ecological situation is rapidly worsening. We don't like to hear about it. Certainly the puer in us does not want to hear a lot about it. Certainly he does not want to be asked to do anything about it. The deforestation of the world's forest, leading to more and more droughts, to the pollution of the water. In spite of the efforts of Greenpeace, and valiant they are, we are losing the ecological battle, and we're losing it rapidly. Poverty has never been on the increase so rapidly. We have millions upon millions of refugees all over the world. Refugees from war, refugees from flood and natural disaster, and very little effort is being made to relocate them, to resettle them, to give them any kind of hope for a fruitful human existence. The arms race continues unabated, both in terms of nuclear weaponry and in conventional weaponry. We are in a frenzy of arming the peoples of the earth. Right now we're in a frenzy of arming the teenagers of the world. I'm told that in a number of places in the world, the thing for a father to get the son is an M16 rifle for his 16th birthday. It's got more status than getting an AK-47. I'm serious. The fathers say, when asked about this by newsmen, well, he's been after me, all of his friends have them. And after all, it's only $1,500, and he should have his own M16. This is recently reported in the last week or so in the news service. The so-called pro-life and pro-abortion movements continue in their self-righteous attitudes toward each other. No one is paying much attention to the explosion of the human population. No one is providing much leadership on the task of regulating in a responsible way human creativity. Now, one principle which you should know that underlies this whole issue of maturity in human beings is that issue. How does one face the task of the responsible regulation of the powers of human creativity? That is the task for women who would try to create mature women, and that is the task for men who would try to create mature men. We are not doing it well anywhere on the planet. We could go on and on and on. We could talk about the school situation, the increasing rate of illiteracy. We could talk about the closing of medical facilities in areas which serve the poor. We can go on and on with this, but you certainly get the picture. We are in an embarrassing time of lack of leadership. And the leadership which we are being offered all too often smacks of the worst kind of puer personalities. I'm not going to mention any recent debates. So, my assertion in the face of this is that the feminist critique about the culture of patriarchy having some central and important role as one of the demonic engines of the destruction of our planet is correct. I want, however, to take that further and to suggest two things that I think are of critical importance. One, we must not equate patriarchy with masculinity. There are many theorists today who do that, who equate patriarchy with masculinity and who equate masculine power as being the source of the problem. My argument tonight, which we will have an opportunity to discuss later, is that our problem on this planet is that there is a great deal of masculine power in the hands of puers. And there are a lot of puers who might be able to challenge that unjust use of power, but who will not do what it takes to get the power to challenge the unjust use of power. And so puer psychology is very, very important. Let me turn now to talk about puer psychology. And I think that you will get a little glimpse of what I see here. First, let me talk a little bit about, you know probably of my work on archetypes of the mature masculine, the archetypal king, warrior, magician, and lover. There are three archetypes of the masculine that are archetypes of a very immature masculine. And I want to just talk about them briefly and then go into a discussion of traits by which you can identify a puer, which you can add to the list that you see in Von Franz. You all know the archetype of the divine child, and certainly, like all archetypes, these archetypes I'm going to speak of have an important role in the human psyche. But in puer psychology, they take on a role that was not ever intended to be played. The divine child is an archetype, of course, which we associate in the Christian world with Advent. It is an image which comes when something new is about to manifest itself in your personality or in the world. If you haven't read Otto Rank's Myth of the Birth of the Hero, you should read that, because it's a wonderful cross-cultural study of this archetype. But the divine child is an image of the beginning of a transformative and liberating process. It's an image of the beginning of liberation. What the Christian theologians used to talk about so much as redemptive process, the drama of redemption. What happens in the puer is that the puer identifies with this archetype and feels himself glowing and feels that he should be adored. And that's one of the most fundamental marks of the recesses of the puer psychology, the quest for adoration. And you can just about understand almost everything a puer does under that rubric. I deserve adoration. If I don't get it, there's something wrong with you. See? And there's something wrong with you if you're a woman and don't adore me. And I'll try to be as cute as I can and as charming as I can, so that you will. But if you're a man and do not adore me, that's worse. And I'm going to hate your guts because you deserve it. So the lust for adoration is at the heart of the puer, and rage comes when it's not received. See? And it's very typical that one throws a tantrum. Later on, I will talk about Hitler's tantrums. Okay. So that's one major archetype that is heavily constellated and dominant in the psychology of the puer. Another one is the trickster, the archetype of the trickster. You know, Coyote in North American, Native American traditions. Hermes, the young Krishna. If you read the apocryphal stories of the young Jesus, all these capture the trickster archetype. Now, the trickster archetype has an important role. Its role is to serve to expose pomposity and inflation and grandiosity wherever it's found. And so the mark of this archetype is irreverence. And it will help an individual not to be obsequious, overly compliant, if it is working in an integrated way in their personality. That is to say, it will help them see through the pretensions of a powerful mentor, or it'll help them see through the pretensions of a male who is a powerful leader. And that's its role. And in pre-modern cultures, you would often institutionalize this, and the court would have its joker figures. And if you were a knight and you would say the truth to the king, you'd probably get killed. But the figure in the court who played the role of the trickster could speak the truth often and get away with it. And it was really an ally of the king, because very often the trickster figure in the court, the social role, would help the king to kind of come down and be human. So it has a very important role to play. It's very mercurial, we say, hermetic. It comes out during midlife crises, you know. Read Murray Stein's book on In Midlife, where he talks about the way that the things that happen to a man when Hermes constellates. But in a puer, the trickster is very much more central. It keeps him from manifesting. He does not want to be seen fully. He is afraid to show himself. And so what he will do is always choose to be manipulative rather than direct. You can see it once you learn about these things in their eyes, because it's very difficult for them to look you in the eye without averting the eyes. It's because it's when you can tell when a person sort of seems like they have something to hide around you. Well, the puer does have something to hide, and you can think a little bit about what it is they would like to hide. So the trickster, you can think about the biblical story of Jacob. Jacob was mainlining a lot of the trickster archetype. Okay. Sneaky. Okay. This is because they do not want to have to put up or shut up. The third of these is a very familiar one to you, and Joseph Campbell has made it famous, and that is the archetype of the hero. If you haven't read Hero with 1,000 Faces, that's fun reading. The hero, contrary to what some people think, is really an archetype of the adolescent, and certainly chief archetype of the puer. A lot of people mistake the hero archetype for the warrior archetype, but they are not at all the same. The hero is a loner, really grandstanding it, doesn't know the extent of the forces which oppose him, has to constantly be rescued by supernatural helpers, doesn't really know when he gets the boon whether he really wants to bring it back and give it to all those people that don't deserve him anyway. You know, you hear this a lot in graduate school. You know? Well, if I had known it was this hard, I wouldn't have become a blank, 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 whatever. I'm not sure that those people out there in that hospital, that mental health center, that church, that whatever, really deserve me. I think I'll go back and get my MBA. So the hero archetype is one which is very important. What is its key important? Well, it's quite important to help people realize the truth that there is a sense in which if you don't do it, no one will. There is a truth like that in your life. And the hero is someone who is willing to go down into the temple of doom and try to rescue the children, even though he may falter a little bit about that as he hears the door close behind him. Remember the Indiana Jones film of that. But in any case, it's a very important kind of archetypal reality. If you don't have contact with the hero, then you're going to probably have too little sense of your own importance. Too little sense of the difference that it makes whether you take on a challenge or not. One of the interesting things that I find among men is that there are a lot more men who think they are not very important than those that think that they are too important. In other words, my guess is that statistically, if men got healed, a lot more of them would see themselves as having much more significant role in the world, and not a less of a significant role. So the hero archetype is important. It's just not something that should be allowed to dominate the personality. Let me talk now about some traits. You can take these traits I'm going to give you now, and sort of use them as a measure for the severity of this kind of thing. First, the puer, and this is a rule, is always passive-aggressive. That is to say, the puer never really feels comfortable with his assertiveness, and therefore will try to smuggle it in if it's going to get it in at all. It's sort of the Brutus complex, you know. The passive aggression sort of comes in the back door. It will always not challenge directly. It will try to trip you up indirectly. And if you study, for example, what underlies the depression, most puers are very depressed a good deal of the time. If you study what is behind the depression of the puer, you will find it's probably the passive aggression. Because if you're passive aggressive, you will be depressed. That's a rule. If you're passive aggressive, you will definitely be depressed. Because the assertiveness that would come out directly if the personality had matured is being turned inward and diffused so that the ego consciousness of the puer will not be able to see it. It frightens him too much. I'll talk a little bit about why it frightens him in a little bit. So passive aggression is always a rule with the personality of the puer. Puer almost always has a serious problem with envy. Has a terrible time admiring people, and particularly men. And a lot of the time, a puer will say to you, boy, I really admire you, but you can tell it's envy because it does not feel right to you. Lionel Corbett talked about this in a very, very lucid way in his workshop on Kohut and Jung last week. And he made a wonderful distinction on that particular issue. But the puer can envy the assertiveness and creativity of others, but will have a very difficult time finding people to admire. And so often when you ask them, well, who are their male heroes? You know, who are the people that when you think of what kind of man you want to be, who do you think of? They have a very difficult time answering that. In terms of my work with people, one of the things that I think most important for them to do is to start trying to find men to admire. Because if you cannot find men that you can admire, you got a bad case of this. Because there are a lot of admirable men. And related to the envy is something that is always with it. And it is what the Adlerian psychologists call the depreciation tendency. The depreciation tendency. The puer is wonderful at looking at something and depreciating its importance, especially men. And you'll find this is related to the sort of cynical streak that you will find in the puer. They're not too impressed with anything, you know. It's awfully hard for them to see anything that touches them very deeply, emotionally, in an inspirational way. They're above it. You know, puers fly. You've heard about puers flying. Well, they're above things. They tend to look down on things. And so the depreciation tendency is almost always present in a powerful way. And what goes with that, what Bernard Malin called the appreciative consciousness, is very difficult for them to locate within themselves. That capacity to appreciate widely and well. That, of course, as some of you have heard me speak on before, is related to the archetypal lover. And a puer has a great deal of trouble with the archetypal lover. The puer always has a difficulty with a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, and above all, as von Franz has pointed out, a sense of commitment. There's a kind of a fogginess in the consciousness, a sense of anxiety, a lot of anxiety and a lot of confusion about what they really want to do with life, in life. And this is directly related to what Ernest Becker has called the human denial of death. Because the denial of death is a litmus mark of the puer. Because he's going to live forever, since he's an archetype, Adonis, since he's going to live forever, he doesn't have to decide. And since he's going to live forever, all those important things that he could choose to do, he can wait a little bit longer to make sure he chooses the right one. And so the death that will not happen to him enables him not to focus. Now, I'm not a Freudian, but I want to say to you tonight that Freud was very good at analyzing this kind of puer psychology. Let me just talk a moment about two aspects of Freud's treatment of puer psychology. He didn't call it that, but it's the same thing. He talked about penis envy and castration anxiety. The only thing is that penis envy is something that males do. Puer males. That is to say that the penis envy that Freud talked about really applies to what happens in the immature male in his relationship with older males deemed to be more powerful. And the dynamics of envy, if you haven't read Ulanov's book on Cinderella and her sisters, you must do that to get a sense of the importance of envy, the radical importance of envy in our problems. Because the poor, misguided young male will almost always envy what he believes to be the larger penis of the older male, but he's really envying a psychological reality that is called by Eugene Monich and others phallos. It's not the penis. It's the powerful, energetic organization of a mature male. And so there is such a thing as penis envy, only the discussions of it being something that women have toward men avoided the point. And, of course, how is the denial of death related to this? It's directly related to this. Freud was right about this. For a young male, death and castration tend to be equated symbolically. And so, the denial of death is a must, because the older male is feared as an enemy and as a castrator, not as a helper. He's not seen as a helper. He's not seen as one who wants to sponsor, to mentor, to empower. The puer does not see the older male as anyone who would want to assist him in becoming more powerful. He cannot see the older male as an ally in a common battle. Now, this is one of the most important dynamics. And I suggest that you want to look again at Kohut's work on the Oedipal conflict, where he suggests that if older men relate to their sons in an empowering way, you don't have this kind of fear of the older masculine in a pathological way. So that's one of the places where the responsibility of older men to younger men is very key in this whole problem. We older men have botched the job in helping younger men to feel safe and loved by us, and to see us as people who want them to be strong and effective and competent and all of those things. So all of these things and many more that I don't have time to talk about tonight go into puer psychology. What I've gone over these things for you to see is that, Jungians, we like to see the positive side in all the archetypal patterns in the psyche, and all these have an important role. But sometimes we gloss over the extremely destructive effects of a dominant puer organization in the psyche. It's tremendously destructive for the life of the man. It's destructive for his family. And what I'm suggesting to you tonight is destructive for his world. The world cannot afford to have as many puers as it has. And so, rather than being romantic about how wonderful it is that we all have this puer within that brings us this new life, and that's all true, but it's 5 minutes to midnight, and somebody needs to grow up a little bit. Well, how does a man grow up? Well, Robert Bly is quite right in choosing the story of Iron Hans. He calls it Iron John. And I want you to go back to that fairy tale, and I want you to read it, and I want you to look and think about that gradual emergence of the golden hair. Because in that story, the golden hair is his masculine power. And I want you to look at that story and how difficult it is for that young man to begin to claim his right to have his golden hair. And what a struggle it is for him gradually to bring his power out of the shadow. And what you will find in that is the story of how the deep masculine, the archetypal masculine, and the human feminine cooperate to welcome the power in this young man. I want you to go back and read it and watch the way in which the deep archetypal masculine and the healthy human feminine cooperate to welcome this young man into the fullness of his power. What happens is when that cooperation happens, he gradually gets more and more secure in claiming it, takes more and more responsibility for his world, and finally at the end, as he marries this young woman who is totally unthreatened by his power, she loves it. She loved it before he even knew he had it. And as he marries her, the great king who was under enchantment emerges and brings him all of his riches and the gifts of his kingdom to use as he will. Why? Because he's shown himself to be worthy. He's shown himself to be worthy of that. Now, so, the acceptance of the golden hair. It's terribly difficult for men to accept their golden hair. We can talk about that in our discussion period and why that is. Because a lot of the time it's because you've had an older puer who will attack you at the first sign that you've got any. Because he knows he doesn't have it. He thinks he doesn't have it. He's got it too, but he doesn't think he does. It's Saul and David. And so you see in that, the initiation in the masculine power is imaged in that tale, a wonderful tale, shows the emergence of the warrior lover in the service of a good king, who then raises him up to his own kingship. Now let me talk just a little bit now about the really scary part. And that is the predominance that we see around the world of masculine power in the service of oppression and death. That is to say, as long as a puer doesn't have his power, or doesn't have a substantial part of it, he's not so dangerous. Sort of pitiful. But he's not real dangerous. Or to put it this way, he's dangerous in the sense that Chamberlain was dangerous in the 30s. And other puers are dangerous in what they haven't got the guts to confront. But not in a malignant way themselves personally. But what we see so often in the world, all over the world, was imaged so well in the movie series in the image of Darth Vader. And that is a male who has undergone enough initiation with the archetypal masculine to get a substantial access to masculine power, but in which some aspect of his initiation has not included the necessity of finding the right throne to be loyal to. This has been imaged also in the Arthur cycles, the Arthurian cycles, and the whole issue for the knights of the realm at that time, whether they were going to pledge themselves in the service of Arthur or whether they were going to pledge themselves in the service of Mordred. In other words, we need to be very clear. There's a kind of masculinity, and the feminist theologians have been trying to force us time and again to see the truth of this. There is a demonic masculine that is not one of these weak, uninitiated puers, but is a masculine which has had an initiation into a very shadowy side of the archetypal power of masculinity. We saw this most clearly, I believe, personally in World War II. If you want to see a study of this writ large, it was actually the model for Darth Vader, you study Nazi Germany. And you see the demonic masculine. And you see it also in the fanatic fascist legions of Imperial Japan. And you see it today. But it's in this, you've got to raise the question, what kind of power is this? Is this full masculine power? Well, it's certainly very potent in some ways. Has the power to kill. In fact, it loves killing. It loves death. If you have the stomach for it, you ought to study sadism. And you ought to study some of the recent psychology of the criminal mind. You ought to study the antisocial personality and the psychopathic personality. Because it's a real human phenomenon and it's extremely widespread. That is the mind, and certainly it's very dominant in male personality. It's statistically much more prominent in masculine personality than it is in feminine. The feminists are right about that. And that is a personality who cherishes power and the ability to hurt with it, to oppress with it, and to destroy with it. And that is certainly a kind of power. It's a very common form that masculinity takes. But is it finally powerful? I think it is finally impotent because it never builds anything. It can never build anything for human culture. Finally, when it's pushed to its end, it has no capacity to care for the planet. When Hitler knew he was defeated, his generals went to him and begged him to allow them to let their troopers surrender. And he would not. He wanted them all dead. His generals begged him to allow them to negotiate a surrender so that Germany, their beloved Germany, would not undergo any more destruction. He refused. He wanted them all to fight until they were all dead. You see. No power for creation. Finally. No power for building a world. Only for destroying worlds out of hate. It is finally, therefore, impotent. It is under a compulsive need to enslave or destroy. This is the satanic consciousness of history. It is a consciousness which has chosen to be an enemy of the truth. Has chosen to be an enemy of the truth and to use whatever power it can in the service of the lie. This is a very, very powerful masculinity. But in my book, it remains a puer masculinity. And the telling aspect of it is the way in which the male who is in this position goes into a 2-year-old tantrum the moment he is confronted with power that is challenging him. If he comes up against something that is not weak, that he cannot exploit and destroy and torture at will, he will go into a tantrum and a panic attack. Really, you push it hard enough, you see the 2 to 3-year-old enraged 2 to 3-year-old behind it. It has been the rule throughout history that confrontations with this kind of evil often issue at the moment of confrontation in enormous childish shame on the part of the perpetrators. You see this, for example, the puer with no power we see in the New Testament in the figure of the rich young ruler who is just not willing to make the sacrifice needed to have an important role. Costs too much to have this kind of role. But the figure that represents this last, the masculine figure with power, is Pilate, who says in the myth, in the Christian myth, he's standing before the true king, and he says, "What is truth?" Which is what this kind of consciousness always does in the face of truth. It always acts like it's really asking a serious question, when in fact it's not. So the mature masculine is a masculinity which is always marked when you see it. And I argue that there are a lot of examples of it around the world, just not enough. It is a masculine which liberates, which empowers, and which is faithful to values that deserve his loyalty. Faithful to values which deserve his loyalty. There are a lot of images. I want you to be thinking about some images in literature and film and folklore and biography of some people like that you know of. Let me speak a little bit to this problem, though, of the warrior soul. People that are honest look at this research on males, and they notice males just seem to enjoy playing soldier a lot more than females, see, from early ages. Something about this testosterone. If you study cross-culturally, study other species, it's not uncommon for the male of the species to be genetically wired to be a warrior. It's not always the male. But there's a lot of evidence that human males are wired to be warriors. And that's a problem. Now, what are you going to do with that if that's true? I think there's probably some truth in that. What are you going to do if men, in order to be mature men, have got to find some way to relate to this warrior archetype within? What if the peacemakers are never going to be able to exorcise that archetype from the male psyche? Well, my sense of that is a short and mid-range solution. That is, there are a lot of things going on in this world in which a man could legitimately engage his warrior energies. And that if the men of this world do not find that warrior energy and engage that warrior energy, a lot of things that radically need to be changed in this world will not be changed. And we will keep sacrificing 30,000 babies a day because of bad water. If I had time, I would just give you a litany of what's happening every day because we don't have enough people with warrior energy to fight very real enemies. We need a lot of doctors and a lot of researchers who can get in touch with their warrior energies in this struggle with AIDS. Because it's war. More than most people know. And I can go on and we'll go on later about this, but as long as there's a real enemy of the human race, As Greenpeace has said, there is a place for rainbow warriors who are radically serious about taking on powerful enemies, even to the point of risking their lives. It's too bad we don't have more of that, in my view. Now, when the eschaton comes and the lion lies down with the lamb, we're going to have a problem. All the problems are solved, and no more real enemies for men to fight. It's going to be a dangerous time. We're going to have to think of something for men to do with all that phallic energy. I think we're going to have to work together to think of some other alternatives of what they can do. Maybe you can come up with some after the break. Meanwhile, we've got a lot of teaching to do with men. We've got to teach them about the mysteries of the scepter of masculine archetypal kingship. We've got to teach them about the mysteries of the sword, the archetypal sword of the warrior within. We've got to teach them about the mysteries of the wand, that is the inner magus, the magician, who can help them have self-awareness so that they can have discernment of who their enemy really is and who the human enemies are of the human race. And they need to have some initiation into the mysteries of the body as an instrument of love, both sexual love and love of the physical world. And that's a lot of work. But there are a lot of men today that are working on this task. And so there is hope, but there is an enormous challenge, and I hope that we can help men of all ages find a connection with their masculine power that will enable them to start being a part of the solution to this planet's current ills and not just the source of the problems. Let's take a break. Thank you very much. Thanks, Charles. We have about 25 minutes or so, so why don't we just discuss for a while. I've covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure that you have many things you'd like to say or questions you'd like to raise. Why don't you just raise questions? I'll try to repeat them so everybody can hear them, and then respond to them. Yeah.
Is there a general typology for the puer? Not.
No, is there a general typology for the puer? I don't think it's really finally a typological issue. I think it's possible to be immature in any typology. We are creative in ways to be immature, and so I don't really think it's probably a typological matter. It would be an interesting thing, though, to think about. If somebody would sort of summarize for us sometime the way the puer does it in the different typologies, that would be real interesting. Yeah. Somebody else. Yes. Yes, you.
What will have some puers now? Something that is new or has always had a lot of puers?
Is the predominance of puers new, or has the world always had a lot of them? Well, I think if you study history, you will realize that it's always been a severe problem. But one of the important things to look at is that in a lot of tribal cultures, there was more clarity than in the modern world about how to make a man who you can trust with your cows. You know? And how to make a man that you can trust with your wife, or your sisters, or your daughters. And in so many pre-modern cultures, this was an initiatory process that the tribe understood, and while it might seem brutal, some of the initiation practices by your standards, it did indeed do a better job of creating responsible men for the tribe than we are doing for our tribe. So I think that that if you look at history, history is really a horror story, and study the history of what it's been to be children in history. History of childhood is just a horror story. So it's never been very good. But there's, in some ways, it's even getting worse now, you see. And the reason we're having such an epidemic of borderline personality disorders and narcissistic personality disorders in our culture is because the fathering is worse. Absent, weak, abusive, or a combination of the three in terms of fathering. One of the things that's interesting to me is that if you're a psychotherapist, think about this a moment. Ask yourself how many people in your practice that you're seeing had fathers that were present, strong, and non-abusive. What you'll find is practically nobody that you're seeing in psychotherapy had that. The ones that had fathers who were present, see, strong and empowering, are not in therapy. So it's getting worse now, and it's getting worse around the globe. All you have to do is travel, as I have, the great cities of Asia, and you see that they're beginning now to mass produce puers even faster than ever before with the aid of American pop culture, which is an enormous puer factory. Yeah, one more.
Have you read or are aware of some of the things that women have been writing now, like the book by Rainey Eisler, The Chalice and the Blade, and how she talks about pre-Christian culture and talks of there not really being wars there, or the culture being so terribly different, and what do you think about that?
Well, I haven't read the book, and so she's asking about the book. What's the title again? The Chalice and the Blade. And I've heard of this book. I've not read it yet. I would like to read that before I comment on it, so I can't really comment on it. I understand that there are claims made about times when there was not a war, et cetera, et cetera. There are also studies of primitive cultures where the warrior archetype is not very constellated. And what's the name of that particular tribe? The Tassidae. But then again, you have to look at what happens when they encounter a culture that is enormously destructive, like ours. And they can't protect themselves. It's not good not to be able to protect yourself from that. So, other comments, questions? Somebody down here, yes?
You were talking about the warriors engaging, and you talked about warriors engaging those altruistic things, aid.
Yes. The warrior, yes.
What do you do on a worldwide level to start to bring that about? It seems like an impossible task almost.
Yeah, well, it may sound impossible, and we better hope it isn't. And so, you can say, well, it's impossible. But you got to start somewhere. What I think, I do a lot of study of history now to kind of, and other cultural sources to get more insight into this stuff. And I think our situation is very parallel to the situation of the Allies in the late 30s. And in the face of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, it was pretty hopeless. And it looked hopeless. And it was the Nazis came very close to winning. And so I think that's a judgment call. It may be too late, see? But one has to do what one has to do in terms of this. And the question of how you constellate this, well, this is not new. Read William James, the great 19th century psychologist. Now, he understood this stuff. And during the great 19th century social reform period, they were aware, the intellectuals were aware that there was a warlike quality to their crusading. And William James said the only chance we've got against the ills that face the human race is to find some way to generate in human beings a passion that has the moral equivalent of war. Now, Jung was later to read William James and be very influenced by William James, but what he was talking about in Jungian terms was the necessity of the warrior archetype. And some of you were talking to me at the break about the importance of the female warrior. Nothing that I have said tonight, I hope that you have not heard me at all suggest that the female warrior is not needed. And Krista was reminding me of the movie, one of my favorite films, Aliens 2, in which Sigourney takes them on. And that is not a masculine image, but she's a hell of a warrior. And we need to mass-produce those in this world, too. But I wasn't lecturing on feminine psychology tonight. I'm lecturing on masculine psychology and the problems of men and the reason why we don't get anything done. I mean, if you haven't studied passive aggression, you ought to study it, because there's so much of it around, it won't be hard to find it, to study. I mean, just look at your institutions. They're eaten up with passive aggression. People get together and work hard on not achieving anything. It is the code of ethics of bureaucracy. We have a study commission and turn it over to a bureaucracy to ensure nothing will get done. I mean, it's very interesting. And this is related to puer and puella psychology. Alfred Adler, excuse me for mentioning one of the other schools, but he constantly indicated that immaturity always consists in not being able to keep your mind on the task. And the reason people cannot cooperate with each other is precisely that. Immature people will not keep their mind on the job. They've got their mind on their own egos. And that is puer and puella psychology writ large. See? Yes?
Iron Han, emerging young man, keeps his goal, has his goal in here, about, he keeps it covered.
Yes.
Does he keep it covered because of the insecurity of it, or because he knows the power of it and he doesn't want to show it off?
Both. Now the question is, in Iron Hans, when the young man keeps his hair covered with a cap, is he doing that because of some fear, or is he doing it because of his knowledge of how powerful it is? I would say both. This is related. If you want to really get a take on this, study Kohut's self-psychology and study how hard it is for a person to be able to get their grandiosity integrated in a healthy way into the person's life. That golden hair is that infantile grandiosity which we all need to integrate, see? Or a Jungian would say the archetypal energies off of the archetypal self. So that golden hair is that archetypal masculinity, and it's potent stuff. And he's very afraid of it. And one of the main reasons he's afraid of it, he's afraid some older male is going to attack him. That's the main reason. And you know what? He's right. He's right. You can tell a shadow king by how quick he is to attack. And the feminists tell us he will attack any woman that's trying to be empowered. They're right. What they don't see clearly enough sometimes is that he will also attack any male that's wanting to be empowered. See? The insecure older male who envies any powerful masculinity wherever it appears. And so it is dangerous for most young men to show it. And that's tragic. We should have older men who welcome it, who help them with it, who bond with them and say, now, you are good. you are really good, but you're not that good. You got to learn this and this and this, because if you don't learn this and this and this, look at the movie Top Gun. Top Gun is a movie that studies this process. And you notice in that movie, there's an older warrior who really loves the Tom Cruise character. He really loves him. And he knows he's going to get himself killed if he can't help him learn the difference between a hero and a warrior. And so in that movie, the young man was lucky. He had an older man that had the power and the authority and the credibility and the love of a young man. The capacity, like a healthy father, when his son reaches that Oedipal period, to be able to look at that emerging masculine power, that boy or that young man, and say, you are really beautiful. You are really beautiful. And delight in that emerging power of the young man. Very few older men can do that, and that is a great tragedy. And it's crippling us in turning out the kind of men that we need in this world. Yeah. Yes.
Do you think they're conscious efforts on the part of producers? Do they know these depth psychological things?
Are they all Jungians? He's saying that I sometimes mention a lot of films that talk about these dynamics, and I think that's self-conscious on the part of filmmakers. I think it's self-conscious on the part of some. For example, George Lucas clearly has studied Jungian psychology and mythology very, very thoroughly with a great teacher, Joseph Campbell. And so some of them, Star Wars, for example, is a very carefully researched study in depth psychology. However, these dynamics are there. They're not Jungian dynamics. They're human dynamics. And anybody that can see will see these things. I just thought of one movie that you all ought to see about this whole thing we're talking about tonight. It's The Great Santini. The Great Santini. Sort of a man whose responsibilities are to be a father, but who is so possessed and inflated by the warrior archetype that he is destroying the young man that he ought to be empowering. See? It's a good movie for you to see. Yes.
Danger in healing the puer. Use the example of Darth Vader, for instance, in terms of doing it too fast or the wrong way, giving the power, but without the soul or the primitive instincts with which to integrate that into a more correct path.
Is there a danger in healing the puer? Say that again, Foster.
In healing the puer, in giving him the power before he's ready to integrate that and to use that for a more positive.
I see. Is there a danger in empowering a male, in effect giving him the sword before he is initiated into what the Japanese would call kendo? Absolutely. We did this in Vietnam. And the tragedy of Vietnam is that we had an officer corps that was predominantly puers, and presidents that were predominantly puers. And so when the soldiers got in there was no one to model for them any kind of limits on power and appropriate uses of power. And so there we get this holocaust of rape and pillage by American soldiers, and using their substantial military power in a very, very destructive way. And if you are a young man and you experience yourself doing that, and you see the demonic side of your masculinity and your power, and you see it acted out on village after village after village, women and children, and time after time after time. I've talked to a lot of these vets. They feel defiled by this. And we don't want to deal with that shadow side of the masculine power, which they have to deal with all the time. Nobody helps them deal with that. And there's something They have to be helped to deal with what happened to them and why, and that it was not their fault in that sense. They've got to stop blaming themselves for this. Yes, the Apocalypse Now film treats that. What you've got to understand is that when a young boy stays a puer, he has been failed by the men in his culture. His mother cannot initiate him. His wife cannot initiate him. Only older males can help him. He has been betrayed by the elders, the masculine elders of his people. And we ought to face that. Because if we don't face that, then we're just passing the buck. We're continuing to pass the buck, yes.
It seems that to go from childhood to adulthood, you need a mentor.
Yes.
To initiate you into adulthood.
Yes.
Also seems that with post-World War II baby boom, there is a relative paucity of mentors.
Can you hear him? With the baby boom, when you need mentors to get through this transition, there seems to be a paucity of mentors. I think that's absolutely right. I've never heard it said just that way either. Well, I mean, he's just talking about the sheer demographics of this. The sheer demographics of it. I mean, there are just not enough men to go around who have the emotional wherewithal to do this. It's not easy. Hey, it's not easy to work on this thing. Now think back to that movie Top Gun. Tom Cruise was lovable, but he was a pain to work with. See? So that's an interesting, just sheer demographic point. And it also, you could probably do something with that in terms of the analysis of why we seem to be getting such a enormous increase in very regressive forms of psychopathology now. And right on your point there. Yes.
First, earliest, basic, fundamental relationship, which is between a son and his father. I mean, every member of the baby boom generation has a father somewhere.
You have to have a mother first, the primary caregiver. There's a lot of things that are being written now about how the primary caregiver is the mother, and it's a different separation with the male than it is with the female. The female doesn't have to separate as the separation is not as clear between a female with her mother than it is between the male and his mother. And there's this taboo thing, you know. So he has to separate maybe too early from the mother and go to the male, and if there's not a male there for him to go to.
And it's not so much just a problem of whether there is a male there. See, you can have the physiological equipment of masculinity. You can have the penis without having a phallus. And you see, if the father was there every day and he had never had an initiation, his son could not learn to be a man from him. And that is the hard truth that makes it even worse. I mean, even if you had dad home changing your diapers every day, and for the first 6 years, if dad didn't have the slightest idea who he was, I mean, that would make it very difficult. Yeah.
I'm trying to understand his argument, because I think there's something there. I'm just having a hard time grasping it. I understand, I think your basic point is that there are many more men right now aged 25 to 45 than there are men aged 45 to 65 or older.
Yes.
Okay. But the fact remains that we still have the same problem with that generation, which is that their fathers are unable to provide the kind of emotional and psychological support for their children. And I don't see how that's different with the baby boom generation than with any other.
Well, it's just a matter, I think.
If the father fails, you have to go somewhere else. You either go to a psychotherapist or
That's right.
go to
That's right.
a mentor of
That's
some
right.
sort. And when it gets to that point, then I can see very clearly the point, because then the numbers are stacked against it.
Well, and you've put your finger right on it. I mean, see, what you got to realize is it's very difficult to idealize a man your own age sufficiently for that man to constellate the archetypal masculine for you enough to really fill you out in your masculine. Now, it's not impossible, but it's just difficult. And so I don't think this is hopeless at all. And I don't think it's dependent. I'm not a Freudian. I don't think you have to experience this in the transference with a mature Freudian analyst. Because if you do, I'm not going to say that. Keep me from saying that. I think it, but I won't say it. But anyway, you were going to say something.
In lots of the cultures that you spoke about earlier, the father is not the initiator in any event. The mentor or initiator is mother's brother or someone else. And if we have someone who, by the time they're adults, are puers who have not had fatherly initiation, they're probably not going to get one from the father anyway. And maybe what we need to think about is how other institutions, educational, religious, etc., can respond to it.
Yes.
Where they don't respond to it in the Methodist Church, we just go and find the Moonies or someone else
right.
who can give them structure and function as an idealized male figure.
Right. Krista's saying that that a lot of the time the initiating male does not have to be. In fact, in many cases, it need not be the father anyway. We're not talking about the father here. We're talking about archetypal masculinity, which is a lot more than the father archetype. See, people make a mistake by making too much of the father archetype. That is only one expression of the king. And there are many others in there for the masculine initiation. So she's saying, well, we need to be about thinking about ways, other ways through which we can present to young men the kind of models that can be idealized and introjected to help work with this. And there's no question about it. I mean, that is the challenge. We're out of time. I wish we... Yeah, go ahead.
I'm the one.
Okay.
But I just wanted to ask him. I've heard it even said that the father can't do it. That it's really the job of grandfather, uncle, or brother. What do you think about that notion?
Well, I think that what I would rather say, he's asking, well, can the father ever do it? I think that what you say about that is that you just recognize the difficulty of the Oedipal conflict. And that statistically, a great number of fathers are not going to have resolved that themselves well enough to be able to be sufficiently empathic with the son to do it. If the father is capable of being empathic enough and really delighting in the son enough, like Kohut talks about, he can get it from the father. The fact is, though, in most of our experience, the fathers haven't resolved that enough, so we turn to other males. That's more of a practical solution. So it's you want to get it, we men have to get this archetypal masculine mediated wherever we can find it. Thank you a lot very much. I've enjoyed it.